most of us here are, well, to put it finally, guitar nuts, guitar geeks. And a lot of us have been collaborating together. There's a group, I mean, Eric and I have known each other for years. Arian and I have known each other for years. Alan and I have known each other for years. Lynn, well, I don't still admit to knowing Lynn, but you know, you get the point. And I see that, I mean, so many of us have been doing informal collaborations, and especially in the early electric guitar world, which, again, we are the only people who seem to really be, you know, doing this work. And it's important work. I mean, dispelling myths, learning new things. If you think about all of the new information that has come to light, even in just the last 5 to 10 years, everything that was, you know, known before is questionable or wrong or something. So this is the third Wichita Guitar Symposium. And again, we seem to be going from strength to strength. And again, this is all due to this man. He needs another hand, by the way. What Eric and I have talked about and proposing is that we make this a little bit more formal. We are proposing the formation of an electric guitar society. Almost any other musical instrument has a society. Clavichords have a society. They don't deserve a society, but they have one. And it's amazing that probably the most popular instrument of all time does not have one.
It's not the clarinet?
The what? Never heard of it. Now, what would the society be? That's a good question. I'm leaving this kind of open to you. I would like to know, what would you people like to see this do? Would you like to see, I mean, one thing is it can be an organization to you know, keep doing what we're doing here and have this symposium on a regular basis. We can be a format for publishing information. We could start a website. There's a lot of things we can do. The advantages to doing this more formally is that this allows us to apply for funding for things and to fund things. How many people here have books in them that they've not written because they could use financial help to do it? How many, yeah, okay, yeah, we know about you, Lynn. Okay. That was a rhetorical question. Or other projects. I mean, for example, I was amazed at Lynn's, you know, CGI turnaround, you know, the thing like Avatar yesterday. It was hard to look at the pictures and go, wow, they're turning, that's great. There are so many things that we could be doing that an organization would help to do. And so I'm just proposing that we do something. I guess the thing would be to do is to get people's names and email addresses and you know, to start getting a database of people who are interested in this. And then we can take it from there and see where it goes. You know, again, this is not me telling you, I want you to tell me.
All right. Thanks, Matthew. Well, our first presentation is Alan DiPerna, who is a journalist and has been for many years publishing in, I believe, all of the guitar magazines, many of the music magazines, a book publisher, and we do have a small sampling of books in the museum gift shop downstairs, and a new book coming out in October, which we're very excited to see up on the screen there, Play It Loud, an epic history of the style, sound, and revolution of the electric guitar. So, Alan, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, as Eric says, the new book is called Play It Loud, an epic history of the style, sound, and revolution of the electric guitar. co-wrote it with a very good friend and colleague of mine, Brad Talinsky, who was the former editorial director of Guitar World magazine. Brad and I have worked together probably since 1989, somewhere around there. Man with red hair, are you Alan DiPerna? Yeah. What did I do? You know, what did I do? I love your work. I want to work with you. So, for the past 25 years or so, he's been giving me these plum assignments, sending me around the world to interview Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck and David Gilmour, you name it. We've worked together on stories. We decided, and Brad himself is an excellent journalist, writer, done a lot of fantastic work, and we decided it was time to kind of pool our resources and come up with a popular cultural history of the electric guitar. It's not a book, well, it's a book for all of you specialists, but it's also aimed at the general audience. People who wouldn't know, you know, a pick guard from a Machine Head. People who wouldn't even know that Machine Head is the Deep Purple album that has Smoke on the Water on it. The general reader, and to relate the electric guitar to everything else that was going on in the culture when it was born, and also the way that the guitar affected the culture. So we're looking at things like fashion, architecture, furniture design, also larger issues, gender, race, class, all of these kind of things. So Brad and I put together a proposal, shopped it around, the VR agent, and a nice young man at Doubleday named Yaniv Soha, who I have to give a lot of credit to, was very enthusiastic about the project. He said, hey guys, this is great, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to build a whole narrative around 12 significant electric guitars. So the selection process began. We narrowed it down to the 12. Chronologically, it takes us from the 1920s up to the present day. And you know, all the usual suspects are in there. The Rickenbacker A25, the Les Paul Telecaster, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that. So popularizing, I guess, yeah. Yeah, but I was wondering what I was going to say to a room full of preeminent guitar historians, collectors, curators, organologists, museum professionals. I'm much more of a generalist, so I don't mind telling you I'm nervous to be up here. What am I going to say to these guys? And it came to me one night. Thank you. That's what I want to say to all of you, because this work is based on your work. Matthew Hill kindly let me read his doctoral dissertation. The first chapter couldn't have existed without it. Lynn Wheelwright fielded countless naive questions. Like, how does the magnet do exactly? You know, very patient man. Richard Smith isn't here. I relied on his work. Walter Carter isn't here. Relied on his stuff. Wayne Goines isn't here, but my partner wrote the Charlie Christian ES-150 chapter. He relied very much on Wayne's work. So thank you all. So as I said, the book begins in the 20s. In studying the cultural history of the 20s, I was increasingly intrigued, and especially in looking for ways to present this to the general reader. I was really intrigued by the parallels to our own time, the digital age. You know, the 20s were the electrical age, disruptive technologies in a way. The automobile, radio, television, all of that. So I kind of take the reader through those things. You know, all the usual stuff. Lee DeForest, the Audion vacuum tube, amplifier for radio frequency circuits, 1911, Kellogg and Rice, paper cone speaker, 1921, although Matthew was saying they didn't hit the market until 27,
26, 27.
Yeah, yeah. Golden Age of Radio, NBC, 1926 gets started. CBS gets started in 27. Sound films, of course, The Jazz Singer, 1927, wasn't the first sound film, but it was the first blockbuster. So, incredible perceptual shift taking place in this time period. Women get the vote in 1920, as I recall. Jazz becomes popular. This great African American art form. So marginalized groups are gaining more power, and the electric guitar becomes, in a way, a vehicle for a lot of these groups to find a voice. I should say that I did English Lit, both graduate and undergrad. And if you do English Lit, sooner or later you're going to run into Walter Benjamin, the cultural critic. And he had something to say about the era that I thought was good for the book. He said, during long periods of history, the mode of human sense perception changes with humanity's entire mode of existence. The cultural critic Walter Benjamin wrote in this landmark 1936 essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Benjamin was one of the first intellectuals to grasp the immensity of the changes wrought by the era's technological advances. While many of his contemporaries saw the advent of mass media like radio and movies as a triumph of vulgarity, Benjamin saw the dawn of a new era of populist art. In the 1920s, for the first time ever, people found themselves living in an environment where electrically amplified sound was everywhere. This constituted a major collective perceptual shift, a reorientation of the senses foregrounding the aural. It's what helped put the roar in the roaring 20s, one more factor contributing to the amped-up excitement of the era. The electric guitar was very much a product of this zeitgeist, both technologically and culturally. Alongside radio, PA, and cinema sound, it was an innovation that would impact popular culture on an epic, unforeseeable scale. So, in dealing with this chapter, I also tried to kind of imagine myself into just how novel electricity itself would have still been in the era. It was still a relatively new thing. Again, much like the early computer era, where people are, the internet is so familiar to us now, but there was a period where it seemed strange and exciting. So I was looking for, some like cultural parallels. And so I decided to say, in the early 1930s, electricity itself would have still been regarded with a certain mixture of awe and superstition. The lightning bolt symbol used as a logo on many electrical products of the era, including the Rickenbacker electrode, is reminiscent of the lightning bolts wielded by the Norse god Thor, a signifier of immense preternatural power. And it's kind of interesting the way Norse mythology becomes one of the key motifs in heavy metal in the 70s and 80s. So, yeah. Quack advertisements at the time touted electrical devices purporting to do everything from enhancing sexual prowess to curing baldness. Electricity was seen as a mysterious force that could cure or kill. I got another one of these. Some of these notions go back to the late 18th century work of scientist Luigi Galvani and his nephew Giovanni Albini, who experimented with applying electrical currents to cadavers, both animal and human, producing spasmodic muscle movements in lifeless flesh. And galvanization has set some corpses grinning, the poet Lord Byron satirically wrote in the early 19th century. Byron's friend Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley dramatized the concept of electrically revivified human remains in her novel of 1818, Frankenstein. With the 1931 release of the Hollywood version of Frankenstein and its 1935 sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, the unnatural, life-giving powers of massive sparking electrodes would have been very much a part of the public imagination. These images might well have subliminally colored people's perceptions of the early electric guitar. it seemed like more than just music, but a work of weird and marvelous science. And notice that Elsa Lancaster's hairdo there, that gray streak also kind of takes the form of one of those lightning bolts. So, you know, this kind of universal signifier of electricity's awesome power. Of course, people were, at the time, were also keenly aware of electricity's power to take life. In the early 20th century, the electric chair had become the chief means of executing criminals in many of the United States. In 1928, photographer Tom Howard smuggled a camera into the execution of convicted murderer Ruth Snyder at Sing Sing prison. The New York Daily News published a gruesome front-page shot of the event shortly thereafter. It was one more occurrence that emblazoned the ominous power of electricity on the public's awareness, right around the time the first electric guitars started to appear on the market. Having such an awesome force readily available from electrical outlets and sockets in people's homes made some uneasy. In his comedic autobiography of 1933, My Life in Hard Times, the author and cartoonist James Thurber wrote of his grandmother, who, quote, lived the latter years of her life in the horrible suspicion that electricity was dripping invisibly all over the house. It leaked, she contended, out of empty sockets if the wall switch had been left on. She would go around screwing in light bulbs, and if they lighted up, she would hastily and fearfully turn off the switch. This isn't as strange as you might think. My dear father was an electromechanical designer. He must have got it from his mother, because at night he would go around, before he went to bed, he would go around unplugging minor appliances. So, you know, it's kind of interesting attitudes surrounding electricity at the time. Such attitudes were common at the time Thurber's book was published, just 1 year after the A25 hit the market. So perhaps there was something fortuitous in Gage Brewer's choice of Halloween night for the electric guitar's debut performance. I don't know if any of the earlier presenters had read the little press release blurb that you know, that Gage published announcing his performance, but he did promise, after all, to startle the music world. Even before the era of the rock and roll guitar god, the electric guitar seems to have possessed a mythic dimension. The Electro String Corporation itself didn't scruple to wax mystical with their 1933 marketing slogan, "Brother musician, listen to a miracle." So that's the 20s. It goes on from there. As I say, we do the Les Paul blog. We come to the Fender Telecaster, and Leo Fender, a well-known story. Again, you know, what can be said about that hasn't been said before? What can be said for the general audience? And I should point out that as my colleague and I were writing the book, our editor was kind of critiquing it from the perspective of the general public, and he would call us on terms like arch top. Oh, you have to be so technical, you know. You know, can't we just say hollow body guitar? And it's like, well, no, we can't just say that, because we're talking about a certain type of hollow body guitar, and et cetera, et cetera. So we were dealing with those kind of challenges. So in presenting the Telecaster, I mean, something that's always struck me, and I think I even wrote about it a little bit in the companion volume to the guitar collection, is how neatly and beautifully Leo Fender's work slots into the mid-century modernist movement. Design, furniture, Charles and Ray Eames, Richard Neutra, the people like that. Among the many other things that can be said about the guitar, there's really beautiful examples of, you know, mid-century modernism. So I give a little background about that. Rather than aping old world craftsmanship, the mid-century modernists sought to find a kind of practical beauty in industrial building materials. The bolts that held chairs together, for instance, were left visible, proudly proclaiming the structural principles that held the chair together, rather than hidden beneath a wooden veneer in an effort to make the object look like it had been fashioned in 1850 rather than 1950, which is to say the Telecaster fits neatly within the context of the mid-century modernist movement in design and architecture. The simple lineaments of the Telecaster find a close parallel in the iconic molded plywood chairs designed by Charles and Ray Eames in 1946, and the spare angular functionality of Southern California case study houses designed by architects like the Eameses, Richard Neutra, Ario Sarin, and in the years between 1945 and 1966. The blonde wood finish of many early Tellys were quintessentially mid-century modernist, particularly echoing the finishes found on furniture by the Hayward Wakefield Company. So, I'm sorry, this is in '83, this is the best image I could find, but of course, the bolt-on neck that horrified Ted McCarty's, oh God, anybody with a bandsaw can make an electric guitar now, is very parallel to, the Eames chairs. Again, you have the three visible bolts. It's the thing about mid-century modernism, the kind of honesty. It is what it is. Yes, there are screws holding this thing together. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a piece of molded plastic with rivets in it. Isn't that beautiful? The idea of creating things for a newly emerging middle class, things that are elegant, beautiful, but simple. It's precisely what Leo Fender was doing. And I did a little research. The Eameses were in Venice on Washington Boulevard, and Leo was, of course, in Fullerton, a distance of some 38 miles. Back in the mid-50s, I don't know how long that would have taken. Traffic in LA wasn't as bad as it is today, but I don't know what freeways existed back then. None, huh? How do you say none? Did Leo Fender ever meet the Eameses? I'd be interested to hear your speculation on it. Probably not. Did Leo Fender ever sit in an Eames chair? Yes. Did Leo Fender ever have a sandwich at a Gucci diner designed by architect John Lautner? Yes, to all of the above. So there was kind of a distinctive Southern California sensibility. Yes, Steve?
I was just going to say, he probably bought his wood at the same place that the Eames bought their wood.
I'll bet you. Yeah. So it's this real kind of cross thing.
I would like to point out though that that's a later 3-bolt chair. Not, and the earlier 4-bolt chairs were considered superior.
And those backs, they would just wobble.
Yeah, the backs would actually wobble.
Yeah. So I hadn't thought of that. Bought wood in the same place. Yeah, because there's these stories of Leo going down to the hardware store to get the automotive paint colors and everything. So yeah, very much the same world, and a kind of light went on in my cranium when I read somewhere that Ted McCarty lived in a colonial-style house back in Wichita. So it's definitely more the Gibson versus Fender sensibility. The Gibson sensibility in the early, the Les Paul and the early electrics. It's definitely a bit more Midwestern, a bit more old world. I mean, McCarty made up for lost time with the Flying V and all of that, and did some incredible work. But I really feel that Southern California was a big part of the chemical mixture that created the early Fender models. Charles Eames said something that seems so relevant. Charles Eames, one of mid-century modernism's chief theorists, summed up the movement's goals. Although speaking about furniture, it's easy to see how his words are equally applicable to the new kind of electric guitar Fender was building. Quote, "The idea was to do a piece of furniture that would be simple yet comfortable. It would be a chair on which mass production would not have anything but a positive influence. It would have in its appearance the essence of the method that produced it. It would have an inherent rightness about it and would be produced by people working in a dignified way." Although you read those early accounts of the original Fender factory with the toxic fumes, and there was no heating, and they had to go down to the railroad station to go to the bathroom. Still, I like to think it's people working in a dignified way. That people being well treated, which is precisely what Leo Fender was driving for in his own way. His goals were identical to Eames' stated ambition, quote, to make the best for the most for the least, unquote. That is, the best possible guitar, accessible to a great many players at the lowest possible price. And as much of the energy and activity of mid-century modernism was centered in Southern California, its stylistic principles were very much in the air as Leo Fender was working on his early electric guitar designs. In these contexts, the Fender aesthetic can be regarded as essentially SoCal modernist in spirit. Casual, informal, populist, effortlessly and elegantly discarding the fussy, hidebound traditions and restrictions of the pre-war world order, not to mention the greater formality of America's Midwest and East Coast. So that's the Fender chapter. How are we doing on time?
Good.
Yeah, all right. We got time for a Beatles story, maybe? So, another chapter is devoted to the Rickenbacker 36012, you know, one of the most iconic guitars that usher in the rock era. And I should point out generally that among our choices for the 12 guitars, the earlier ones were chosen for their design significance, their structural significance. After you get into the 50s, we start choosing instruments for more of their musical significance. There's a chapter on Jimi Hendrix's Woodstock Strat. There's of course a chapter on the Beatles, you know, the British invasion hitting the United States in 1964. And I'm sure...
Did the Beatles start with Brahms guitars?
Sorry?
Did the Beatles kind of get their start on Brahms guitars?
Not that I know of. Anybody?
They played Brahms.
When there were the Silver Beatles,
Yeah.
back in the day before they became famous.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there were different guitars they had, but the thing that made me want to play the guitar is that what you see up there on the screen. I'm sure many of you can tell the same kind of story, and most of us guitar geeks know the story, know that F.C. Hall of Rickenbacker brought this instrument to George Harrison at the Plaza Hotel in New York in February of '64.
February 9th.
Yeah.
At 2 a.m.
But I mean, it's an oft-told story, but I wanted to dig a little deeper with that. I wanted to almost like forensically recreate that day, which I try to do in the chapter. And I learned a couple of interesting things. I always thought that Hall just brought the guitars into the Plaza, showed them to the Beatles. But actually, Hall was set up at the Savoy, another hotel on Central Park nearby. He and Harold Buckner, I think was his sales rep. They had, they had set up like a little trade show display. They engaged Toots Thielmans, the Belgian jazz guy, to be there and entertain the Beatles, because John Lennon said that he picked up Rickenbacker because of Toots. So the day basically goes like this. Harrison, as you know, was sick in bed with the flu. He couldn't go rehearse at the Ed Sullivan show. And the Beatles' appointment with Hall and Rickenbacker was after the Ed Sullivan rehearsal. So, and of course, I'm a New Yorker, but even though I was 10 years old, I can vividly remember this. When the Beatles hit town, it was just mass media hysteria. The Plaza was surrounded by, screaming kids and everything. So anyway, Harrison's in the Plaza in bed. The rest of the Beatles are at the Savoy with John Hall, F.C. Hall, and his wife. Catherine Hall was there, a few other people. And they show Lennon and McCartney, the 12 and a bunch of other guitars, and they really like it. And they say, well, you got to show this to George. So they have to get from the Savoy to the Plaza. The problem, however, was that the horde of hysterical adolescents who had surrounded the Plaza had gotten wind of the fact that the Beatles were now at the Savoy. So they run the short distance to the second hotel and laid screaming siege to it, effectively blocking the Beatles' escape route. This kind of scenario had become an occupational hazard for the quartet and their management. Back in England, they evolved a whole set of strategies for evading frenzied fans, from sliding down laundry chutes to using decoy vehicles to distract overzealous well-wishers while the band escaped via another exit. But now they were in a strange city in a strange country, facing an unforeseen complication in a busy day filled with commitments and challenges. And F.C. Hall found himself inside of a scene that could have come right out of the Beatles' first feature film, A Hard Day's Night. Only this was real life. And there was a lot at stake for Rickenbacker's chief, an opportunity to increase his business exponentially. So Hall went down to the hotel lobby and had a word with the Savoy's bell captain. Hall was determined to find a way to get the Beatles and his own party and the Rickenbacker 12-string safely out of the Savoy and into the plaza. He hadn't come this far to be thwarted by a mob of screaming kids. Yeah, I should back up a little bit and say that FC went to great lengths to set this meeting up. Telegraphing Brian Epstein overseas. His wife Catherine had amassed a little scrapbook of Beatles press clippings. This was a huge priority. In fact, there's a letter in Richard Smith's book from Buckner, again, the sales rep to Hall. He said, you better grab these boys or else they'll all be playing Fenders. And Gretsch's guy, Jimmy Webster, had gone over to England to attempt to secure an audience with the Beatles and failed. I mean, everybody wanted a piece of everybody wanted a piece of the Beatles. So Paul had gone to, the great lengths to set this up. So here he is in the Savoy, and how's he going to get the guitar over to the plaza? So he talks to the bell captain. The bell captain pondered the situation for a while, then remembered the existence of a tunnel leading from the hotel's basement to a discreet exit inside Central Park. He obligingly led the Lennons, McCartney, Starr, Epstein, the Halls, and Buckner down to a subterranean passageway. With F.C. Hall in possession of the 36012, they traversed the tunnel's length, emerged in Central Park, and enjoyed a brief stroll over to the plaza, which they entered unharassed, making their way up to the 12th floor. And as everybody knows, George Harrison was doing a radio interview at the time. They put the guitar in his hands, he strums it a little and sings, and the DJ says, well, do you like it? He says, of course, it's a Rickenbacker. So, and on we go through history. Another thing that kind of intrigues me in general about the electric guitar that I kind of bring forward in the book. Yesterday, Lynn Wheelwright was telling us about how in the early days of pickups, there was, in a way, there was no right and wrong. There's all these crazy designs, the magnets here, the magnets there. The same thing is true of electric guitar stylistics. There were no rules for this instrument when it first came out. And there's just an incredible amount of freedom in that. Unlike the violin or the piano, there wasn't the burden of history, there wasn't the burden of tradition. People were free to create, to create their own styles and to create all these new kinds of music. So, we walk through the years. Hendrix, I kind of deconstruct Hendrix a little bit Hendrix at Woodstock, the iconic scene. I kind of cast it in terms of Bob Dylan goes electric at Newport in 1965. Monterey Pop Festival 2 years later in 1967, you have the Who and Jimi Hendrix both vying backstage for who's going to go on first, who's going to go on second. They're both going to smash their guitars. The second one, whoever goes on second is going to seem like an anticlimax. So, there's a backstage confrontation, and that brings us to Woodstock. And I kind of do that because as much as I greatly admire and love Jimi Hendrix, I've always had a problem with kind of sloppy music criticism. They kind of, Hendrix, he must have been from outer space. Where was he coming from? And actually, it's kind of Buddy Guy's licks coming from Pete Townshend's rig, isn't it? I mean, it's not. Hendrix Hendrix wasn't so much ahead of his time as he was of his time. You know, I try to bring that forward by, you know, contextualizing the whole birth of the guitar hero. So, my partner Brad is much more of a metal guy than me, so he kind of deals with Van Halen, Frankenstein, Steve Vai, the Ibanez Gem, the 7-string, all of that, there's a chapter. We get to the end of the trail, and we're wondering, okay, well, what should be the 12th guitar? What kind of represents the final stage in the evolution of this thing? And we were kind of hard, you know, we were kind of stuck for the last guitar. I was sort of advocating for the Line 6 Variax. You know, it's digital, it's got all these sounds within it, and you know, Brad says, yeah, but who plays it? Steve Howe and Yes plays it. Like, yeah, but who else? So we were hard put to find something that sums it up. So what we ended up using was Jack White's 1964 Montgomery Ward airline guitar. Then the final chapter deals sort of with the way the electric guitar has been recontextualized by the millennial generation, specifically through the medium of garage rock, you know, the White Stripes, the Lines, all of that. The airline guitar is a beautiful guitar, but and again, I'm indebted to Matthew Hill for this whole argument, but it's always described as weirdo, oddball, et cetera, et cetera. How come? Because it's just as much a piece of mid-century modernism as the Fender Stratocaster is. And in a way, it's a lot more revolutionary because it's made out of plastic in essence. So you know, we ended with that, and I think that's very exciting.
I said nobody was making those guitars to be weird and to not sell.
Right. Exactly.
They were making them to sell.
Yeah, yeah. And you were saying that the National Glenwood was comparably priced to a Strat at the time.
No, Glenwood was much more expensive than
It was
a
more
Strat.
expensive.
It was comparably priced to a Les Paul, even though they were separated by a couple of years.
Right.
But yeah,
right.
it was more expensive than a Les Paul. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of, well, I deal with Fat Possum Records. I don't know if any of you know this kind of, you know, blues label, and their slogan is not the same old blues crap. So what I'm seeing happen is that a new generation is taking this mid-century tradition and looking at it in a different way. Let's run the film again, and instead of obsessing over the Strat, let's obsess over some of these Italian guitars, some of these East German guitars. Instead of obsessing over British and American groups, let's get into compilations of garage rock from Thailand, from Latin America. So I'm really excited by what's going on with these things because it's much more international. It's much more gender equal. It's an exciting new perspective. So I guess what I'm saying in essence is that the electric guitar has now acquired a tradition. It's not about to go away anytime soon, but anybody who picks one up nowadays has the burden of all this on. You know, the Hendrix, Harrison, the Charlie Christian, et cetera, et cetera. So. And I find it exciting the way new players are finding ways to utilize that tradition. I discussed the guitar player St. Vincent, Annie Clark, what she's doing. There's a young shred guy named Tosin Abasi who's playing these 8-string monsters. So whether it's extreme metal, whether it's garage rock, and the digital age, the internet, has a lot to do with it, because suddenly all of this information is accessible. Suddenly it becomes possible for people to have some kind of a career playing just about any kind of guitar music. You know, anybody can have 200 fans, or if you can have 20 million fans. But so I think we end in a good place. And, you know, I think the electric guitar still has a lot of interesting history out of it. So that's my book, and that's it for me. Any questions?
I've got a couple, well, a question and one comment.
Sure.
Going back to Leo Fender and, you know, the whole Googie style of Populux thing. Well, Deke's not here, but he grew up in Southern California, similar time that I did. I would almost argue that it wasn't the existence of that style in California that influenced Fender so much as the absence of any other style. In other words, there weren't colonial homes in California.
Right.
There's only a couple of areas in Southern California that have, you know, that still have buildings from before 1900. So, you know, at that time, you were saying about like Fender and, you know, being in Fullerton and, you know, and Venice. Well, I mean, even in the 50s, there would have been a huge area of nothing between Los Angeles City proper and Orange County. You would have gone.
It was orange.
Yeah, it was. I mean, as Orange Group, there was nothing. Now it's all one big city. You know, one big city where you don't know where the next city starts until you see a sign. But at the time, there would have been, you know, literally miles of nothing, and Orange County was really isolated. We used to call it, like saying, going behind the orange curtain.
Behind you, exactly, yeah.
You know, and
Don't go there.
and oh no, and where Orange County became kind of cool in the 80s and 90s. Boy, before that, it was as uncool as things could be. It was not. You did not admit you were from Orange County, even if let's maybe you were from Laguna Beach. You know, that was maybe okay. But so I would say that, in other words, he couldn't have helped but been in that world because that's all there was.
There was a blank canvas, as it were.
Yes, and so, you know, he was surrounded by Populux, he was surrounded by neon, he was surrounded by automatopoeic architecture,
Yeah.
and, you know, hot dog stands that look like hot dogs. The brown derby, which looks like a brown derby.
Exactly.
The camera stores that look like a giant camera. and all of this, I mean, again, you know, growing up in Southern California, I said, and you grew up in Southern California too.
I've been there for 25 years.
Oh, okay. So, but, you know, it's like, well, growing up in there, it was like, we thought that was all normal. That you know, and it wasn't until I moved to, you know, Nashville, and it was like, oh, right, there are places that have old buildings that aren't in movies. And really, to, you know, so
Right, yeah.
and so again, it's like, yes.
I mean,
all-
there was, you know, there was a 1920s architectural style, that kind of fake castle.
Oh yeah, well no, yeah, you get fake
Moorish.
Tudor, fake, you know, let's say fake Spanish colonial, but, and again though, here's the key thing, fake. We were, growing up in California at the time was like growing up in a movie set, and you were aware that nothing was quite real, and again, seeing a Tudor house with palm trees in front of it was perfectly normal. Seeing Christmas decorations when there's no snow out and you're all, you know, wearing Hawaiian shirts is perfectly normal. And so, I mean, that's part of that kind of mindset and zeitgeist, I guess, of, I guess what it boils down to is somebody who's going to reinvent things or break any rules would be more likely to do so when there's nothing like, you know, there's no past looking down on you.
Sure, yeah. A tremendous freedom, yeah.
You know, I always felt the bolt-on neck idea came from Doc Kaufman and Bakelite Spanish guitar.
Oh, of course it did.
Oh,
Oh yeah, no, I mean I think that's pretty clear. You know.
oh, there goes that argument.
Oh no, but it's all part of the same. It's all part of the same
Same
thing.
thought pattern.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think these ideas always come from, sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox here, I tend to do this. I don't think these ideas always come from just one source. I think they have many sources that combine in somebody's head. And because even though it's clear that, you know, like, yeah, he got the idea for a bolt-on neck from Kaufman, it doesn't look exactly like the Kaufman one, and you can see a bit of the Eames style. In other words, he's still imposing that modern aesthetic on it. He's not making, it doesn't look like, you know, it doesn't look like the 30s one.
No, no. And that becomes much more apparent with the Stratocaster.
And of course, he then changes all of that, you know, when he starts doing things like the scooped out body, and, you know, which of course he was doing from a completely ergonomic perspective, and yet comes up with this iconic design.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you, yes, yeah. I hadn't really thought of that one, but yeah. The cultural void that was Southern California.
Yes.
All right, anyone else? Anything? Good, well, thank you.
Thank you.